Let's see if mine will come up now. You know, for a guy who works a lot with technology, sometimes technology does let you down. But we'll give it a moment here. Go ahead and hit the play on there, Larry. So as Gordon was saying, I am a PhD student at the University of California, San Diego. I am hosted, and pardon me if there's a few acronyms that start coming out of here, but I am currently at the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Art, Architecture, and Archaeology, which is known as CHISA 3, that is housed in the Qualcomm Institute, which is the UCSD branch of the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology, or CAL-AT2. I apologize if there are lots of buzzwords that come out this morning. If there are, please feel free at any time to just say, Matt, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you just said, and I'll try to, clarify some of that. As Monique rightly points out, I'm oftentimes in this environment where the people I work with are familiar with these sorts of terms, and so if I, forget that sometimes everyone else doesn't work at Atkinson Hall, Qualcomm Institute, CHISA 3, and are familiar with multi-tile display walls and immersive 3D environments, it's because you could say I'm velocitized. I'm used to going at a slightly different pace there at UCSD. So this morning we're going to talk about biblical archaeology and the digital age. When we think about biblical archaeology, we've often thought about the cliche image of a guy with a Bible in one hand and a trowel in another, digging from one site to another. But the discipline has changed significantly in recent decades, and of course even in the past 100 years. Now technology has changed how we conduct the discipline and has affected archaeology in general. So I'm going to focus this morning on some of the methods and tools that are being developed locally here in San Diego and are being used all over the place, and primarily with our digs in Jordan. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how that actually has affected the discipline of biblical archaeology and how we can think about the discipline in light of these new technologies. To begin with, I want to share with you just a short clip that Google produced. So, keep in mind, this is Google producing this clip about a Roman archaeologist who works in Jordan. And I think it's a great way to introduce some of the subjects and the topics. So let's see if I'm able to advance the clip. Go ahead and hit the next over there. Let's go back one. Oh. All right, and now hit. Okay. So hopefully you were able to understand David Kennedy's Scottish accent. It is a little bit more difficult to understand, but he's actually a researcher now who is in Australia and works primarily with aerial photography. So he's one of the greatest assets that we have in Jordan because he has these enormous data sets from all these different sites around the country. And he provides those free to us as researchers. So we're able to collect these different photos, and we're able to use those to study our own research and our own site. But I think that his presentation is also a good point to start with, thinking about the history of some of the big technological advances that we've seen in archaeology. Hey, this is starting to work. So in the beginning, we think about photography as being one of the biggest advances in archaeology in its day. You think about before photography, what were people doing to document ancient sites? Watercolors, painting, drawings, sketching. And inherently, there's a certain amount of subjectivity that goes into that when you are depicting a site through anything where you have to draw, you have to create the lines. Photography advanced it by now removing some of that subjectivity, although there was, of course, subjectivity in the sense that it depended on how you framed it, depending on where you took it. As World War I came around, the advent of aerial photography became one of the biggest tools that showed up in archaeology in its day. All of a sudden, we had a new perspective on sites. We were able to look at the sites in ways that we couldn't have previously. And of course, these archives are still incredibly valuable to researchers today. We're able to sites oftentimes before excavation began, before urbanization in the Middle East began. So we're actually able to see sites in a pristine condition before human manipulation of these sites. But even as we think about these two small advances, but very important ones, photography and aerial photography, there's a great quote from a book that's just talking about the history of photography in the discipline. Go ahead and hit the next key over there, Larry. And it says, by the 1850s, archaeologists had begun to regard photography as let me see if I can get back to it, okay? As a panacea, or one of these healing everything sorts of medicines. Rather, as their descendants 100 years later regard C14 radiocarbon dating, and much of the same sort of dissolution followed when it was realized that such innovations were capable of distorting the evidence. So as I said before, it was a small step towards a greater objectivity in the discipline, but at the same time people realized that photography wasn't perfect, that there were still some problems with it. Now I'm going to show you another clip. This is from colleagues of mine who are at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. This is in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And they are producing some of the very exciting sort of aerial photography platforms. They're working in this immersive visualization systems as well. And hopefully this clip will give you a sense for some of the things that we're doing. If you want to hit the next button, Larry. So they've actually started a company out of the sort of research that they're doing at this university in Saudi Arabia, where they are now specializing in doing aerial survey for excavation, for cultural heritage, and for these sort of things. Next slide. So I want to talk about photogrammetry as one of the methods that are being developed right now. Now, photogrammetry, just to define the term, is basically using photography to measure something. So it might have been taking aerial photography and figuring out what was the distance between one point to another. But now digital photogrammetry has taken it to a new level. So we're actually now producing full 3D models out of this, and I'll show you a little bit what that looks like. Next slide, please. So at our site at Umeri, one of the things that we're trying to do, and we started out doing this from a ladder many years ago, would be to try to get our final photos to be at a different perspective than our normal daily photos were. So this was getting up a little bit higher, getting the full perspective of the field in it, whereas if we were just down on the ground, we could never get the entire thing in the same frame. So getting up a little higher would let us get it into a different frame. Then we moved on to this boom photography. Next slide, please. And this is a different picture of that boom system. It takes a bunch of guys. We have to have a sturdy survey tripod out there. These are a little bit bigger than your normal camera tripod. There's like 50 pounds on the other side of this, and that's all to counterbalance one digital SLR that's on the other side of this. And you can say even then, it takes two guys to maneuver it, one guy to hold the tripod down, and then we sit and swing this thing and take pictures as it's moving across the field. Now what we started out doing with this is we would have to take every single one of those pictures and we would have to geo-reference it. That means that we would have several points in each photo that we knew its real-world coordinates, like latitude and longitude. We would input those in there and we would create mosaic of all of these pictures, putting them together. The one problem was it wasn't terribly accurate because, as your camera would shift a little bit, you would get some photographic distortion, and it means that we could have, from one set of pictures to another, as much as 1 meter or about 3 feet of difference between those, which is a problem when you're trying to have some accurate drawings produced of your site. Next slide, please. And next again. So we now moved on to using a balloon system in southern Jordan. Now these balloon systems, you could actually give this volume because it has a story, and they'll describe what this system's actually doing. So you can see that was actually a aerial balloon. It's a helium-filled balloon. We're able to get a lot greater elevation out of that than just a stick on the ground like what we were using before. Next slide. And this balloon then is able to get a much greater area. And next slide to start this video. And so this is actually, you're going to be able to see some of the live video footage that we're able to get from it, and helps you understand the perspective. Now, the thing about using this balloon system is we didn't have exactly the same problem in stitching all of these small photos together, but we still had the problem that, from season to season or even day to day, we would have enough drift from the balloon that our photos weren't matching up. So this gives you an idea. We were trying to use something like this gimbal, which is a system that makes sure that your camera is always pointing down. And then we could also adjust it so that we could get these oblique photos. So, again, you're able to get a fantastic perspective of these sites, but the problem still exists. And this is really, if you were from the balloon, this is what it would look like. So you have people that are working in the squares. It gives you kind of a sense for the distance, for the perspective that you're getting from it. Next slide. But at the same time, we're not getting exactly what we need to, which is accuracy out of that sort of system. So along comes something called structure from motion. Now, this is a site in Greece, and you notice that all of these blue boxes that are surrounding the archaeological context there represent positions where I took a photograph. So you can see basically I'm going along and I'm just taking one step, click, one step, click, one step, click, and then I put all of these into the software and it produces a very accurate three-dimensional model of the site. So now, no longer are we dealing with a drift of 1 meter or 3 feet. We have an accuracy of about 1 centimeter here. So things are much better than it was before. Furthermore, this is a model, so I can actually rotate this around. I can look at this in all kinds of different angles, and all I had to do was walk around the site. So whereas before we were looking at trying to get a boom to go up, or we're using a balloon, or talking about using things like drones. This is what everybody's liking to talk about this now. Amazon wants to deliver our packages using these little quadcopters. We're flying cameras with them, but we can really achieve the same sort of thing by just walking around the archaeological context, and it's like we're looking at it from above. We can produce the same sort of aerial-like photography, but we have much greater resolution, much greater accuracy. Next slide, please. So, and next slide. So one of the things that we're starting to also do is use laser scanning. Now, before we talk about how we use that on site, I want to talk about how we deal with that as far as the photography or the artifacts go. Next slide. So one of the things that we use are these scanners, these next-engine scanners here. They're very cheap, affordable scanners. We can take these out to the field. They fit in a suitcase. They can fit in your handbag. And primarily, we use it to scan our pottery sherds, but we can scan pretty much any artifact. Even really big artifacts, we can scan those. It's just a lot more work because we actually have to move the scanner. So, I mean, it's meant to scan something, no bigger than a foot or something like that. It produces very high-quality results. And then we have a three-dimensional model with, photorealistic texture on it that we can store in a database or we can share with other people. But for us with pottery, it becomes quite important. So next slide. We're able to produce our pottery plates through these three-dimensional scans of the potsherds in the field. Now, again, as I was saying before, one of the themes that we'll see throughout the talk this morning is that it's one step closer to objectivity in the work that we're doing. So before, people are drawing these by hand. Oftentimes it means they might slice a shirt in half, stick it on a piece of paper, trace it out. Other people are really good at it. They can eyeball it and they just draw it as they look at it. But this is all produced from a three-dimensional model. Next slide. And you'll actually be able to get a better close-up of it. So you can really see not only are we getting the drawings of the pottery sherds on there, but we're actually able to show what the potsherd looked like, more or less an accurate depiction of its color, and it really helps people to understand what the pottery is that we're using and what these drawings are based on. Next slide, please. One of the projects that came out of UCSD and all these buzzwords, CHISA 3, the Qualcomm Institute, is what is called the Pottery Informatics Query Database. In sum, what we can do with this is upload these 3D scans of our sherds to this database, and we can search by uploading another sherd. Now think about that for a second. So part of it is we can just put all of our pottery in there and we say, hey, I need to find a sherd that is similar to this, and with that 3D scan, you can just pop it in there and you can find results. So maybe that is geographical results. What other sites have sherds similar to this? And one of the things is pottery is one of our main diagnostic tools in archaeology. So, through pottery seriation, we're able to say, okay, this was an Iron Age sherd or a Late Bronze Age sherd, and even a little bit more subdivided, so we can say it's an Iron 1 or an Iron 2. So it becomes a main diagnostic tool for us. So if we're able to scan these, have a computer analyze it, and people have used these same 3D scans to do pottery seriation without any human input to it. So they're basically taking and say, computer, how would you divide this pottery up? How would you seriate it? And the computer will go through, process the whole thing, and create a seriated set from the 3D scans. For us, being able to put in a potsherd that we maybe aren't terribly familiar with and find similar results across the country, in Jordan or in the entire region, it's a very useful tool. Next slide, please. Now we're using laser scanning in the landscape as well, and this is, these larger mounted, next slide and I'll show you a picture of it. So this is what these look like. Again, they're going on the tripods out there, and they create what are called point clouds. So every single point in this point cloud represents an X, Y, Z coordinate in real space. So that would be, again, something like latitude, longitude, and elevation. And these point clouds then, next slide, and hit next again, help us to create these incredibly accurate 3D representation of buildings or archaeological context. This is from the Mosaic Church in Petra, and it gives you a sense for the sort of photorealistic examples of the architecture that we're able to record. Keep in mind that everything you're looking at is actually a point or collections of points. So you can see it, kind of on the end there where there's a less complete scan. You can really get a sense for the point. But you look at that and you don't really understand that they're points that we're using as much. Now, as I mentioned before, we have structure for motion, which is using photography to produce these three-dimensional models. The difference is with structure for motion, we can texture it, so we have what's called a watertight model. So it's not points, although we can also create point clouds from that. LiDAR is much more accurate than structure for motion is. So if we're talking about 1 centimeter accuracy with structure for motion, we're talking about 1 millimeter accuracy with LiDAR or laser scanning. So the accuracy is better than what we generally work with in archaeology. So it's one of the best tools that we can have out there. Next slide. These 3D models serve as the basis or the scaffold, really, for a lot of the sort of research that we're going to be doing. So keep those in mind because we'll be talking about that a little bit more as we move on. Now, immersive visualization. As Gordon pointed out, one of these things that I work on are these multi-tiled displays, these 3D immersive environments, and this is something that CHISA 3 and the Qualcomm Institute, they specialize in. There's all these different rooms in the building that house different sorts of immersive display systems. I'm going to describe them to you here before you see some of them so you can kind of understand what I'm talking about when you look at it. The oldest immersive visualization system that they have at the center there is called the Star Cave. The cave, that you'll hear this cave term a lot. The cave actually just means it's a redundant acronym. It is a cave augmented virtual environment. The cave was kind of borrowed from the idea that you are actually walking into a room, but then they are virtual environments. So, for example, the Star Cave is actually, it's a pentagon-shaped room. You walk into it, they can close the back door, and everything you see around you is this 3D virtual environment. So we can be taking the 3D models that we're creating, we can be taking these panoramas that I'll show you in a second and be visualizing them in the environment. So the Star Cave is an enclosed room. It's the big difference with that versus some of the other virtual environments that we use. Then the next one that came along was the Next Cave, which was just taking part of a circle, filling it with screens, and sticking it in a room. So you're standing in front of it, and it gives you some sort of sense of a peripheral vision, but it's nowhere near as immersive or enclosed as the Star Cave. Next came along something called the Tour Cave. Now, the Tour Cave was all using commercially available screens. So these are 60-inch 3D TVs that you could buy at Best Buy, and you could build it at your house if you really wanted it and you had a big enough ceiling to fit all of these in the same room. The big point about this was to prove that we could use consumer technology to build this sort of thing, reduce the cost, make it a little bit more accessible to other people out there. So let's have a look at what some of this stuff actually does. Next slide. So I'm actually out here at our site now using what is called a cave cam. So cave is in the same acronym that you heard about before, cam is in camera. Really, the cave cam is just two cameras on a robotic panorama head. So by robotic panorama head, I mean I push a button and that thing takes a full 360 degree by 180 degree spherical panorama picture. And to give you a sense for what that looks like, I have just a little bit of a video so you can see, and hit next slide so it starts. This is a cave cam that actually is taken at UCSD. That's our Geisel library there. But you'll get a sense. I mean, this is a full 360 degree. We could turn that whole thing around, and if we put it in the star cave, you could turn around, and you would see every side as if you were standing there in person. We can also zoom into it, so you'll see that Jürgen, one of the researchers there, he switches it in. You can zoom in, so you have a slightly different interface than if you were there in person. The one difference is that although you have the quality of photography, which is probably better than these three-dimensional models in the sense of you are looking at a photograph, it is like you are there in person. The problem is you're stuck in one spot. So you can't move behind it. You can't move to see, what's sitting there behind the statue of Dr. Seuss. You're stuck. You're stuck in the spot where they took the photography. Now, as a side note, and by the way, we're standing in the tour cave. This is where this particular film was taken. As a side note, just the other day, we had a visitor from the Israel Antiquities Authority. He came in. He wanted to see what these visualization systems look like. Now, we're supposed to be showing off the technology and not the archaeology. But he and I actually got caught up in talking for about 40 minutes as we were looking at the site where Monique and I dig, just talking about the archaeology. Because he was so struck by how real the photography was. He was able to look at the archaeology. We were discussing that, and finally we said, sorry, we have to stop because we're supposed to be talking about the technology here. Next slide, please. And next slide to start this one again. One of the other things that we can do, so not only do we have that photography, but now this is an example of that 3D model, and this is basically the next cave. So that's set up in a slightly different environment than what you saw before. Now we have one of these 3D models that was captured at Khirbet Nahas. That's Arabic for ruins of copper. And all of these different points represent coordinates for artifacts, radiocarbon dates that were taken in the field. We're able to then put that back in there and recreate the excavation as if we were really there. I should also point out that this particular 3D model is actually just produced from outlines taken of walls or different a locus, which is the smallest unit of excavation that we use. So this was not produced using LiDAR or laser scanning or structure for motion. So it's a slightly different sort of 3D model that you're looking at there. Next slide, please. Okay, database technology. Now, you've seen a lot of the pretty visual sort of things that we're working on, but there is some things behind the scenes that we have to focus on as well. Next slide, please. So at the site that Monique and I work at, they have a system that was really developed first in Gezer before it then showed up at our site. And in the day when they started, 1984, they did cutting-edge things with technology. In other words, they had a computer in the field with a data. We're the only dig at the time to be doing this, and it was cutting edge in the day. The problem was only one person could operate it, so that was slightly problematic. But they would have these forms, which are these very detailed forms, much like when you go to the doctor's office and you have an entire form that you have to fill out. It's the same thing, and you could compare it to that as well, because archaeology is a discipline that kills its witness as it excavates. So, we have to take very detailed forms to describe what it is that we're removing, because as soon as it's gone, it's never there again. No one else is going to see it. We are the primary witnesses to that context which we are removing. So these forms have a lot of information on it. The color of the sediment that we're removing, what is the texture like, what are measurements like, what sort of inclusions are we finding there. So they're these very complete forms. Now, when I came onto the project 10 years ago, we had a system where we would fill these out, and in the middle of the week, we would have the note queen come around and check our notebooks for errors. The Notebook Queen, by the way, is Larry Herr's wife, but since they retired from the field, we now have to deal with this in a different way. So the Notebook Queen was our data verification process. You know, as you're on the web today and you try to sign up for something and you put your password in once and it has that password confirmation, if you don't put it in right the same way, it raises an error. That is what data verification basically is. So she was our data verification process that would happen as we were digging. She would make sure that we were filling out all the right information, that the information that we were putting on the forms was correct. Now, at the end of the season, Larry Herr would take all of these forms back home with him to Canada, and he would digitize them. That means that he would sit down, he would take a couple hours every day and type these forms into a Microsoft Access database. It took him about 2 to 3 months to be able to actually put all this information in. Time-consuming process. Once he was done, he would put that database onto a DVD. He would send those out to people via post, and you would get them 1-2 weeks later. Now, inevitably, Larry is not perfect, although he's close. He would make a mistake. Someone would find something. They would say, "Hey, Larry, there's a problem here. You need to adjust this," whatever it might be. He would make a change, and he would send out another copy to everyone. This is a slow process. Next slide. So we've now digitized our entire database workflow. We're inputting our data in the field on iPhones or iPads or iPods. Then they're synced up with another database that we have back at our lab, which are eventually synced with this kind of permanent web database whenever we have an internet connection good enough to do so. So this is now a research tool. There's no more having to wait for things, a couple weeks for whatever. As soon as they are excavated in the field and those notes are taken, they're up and online, assuming we have an internet connection, which is always questionable in Jordan. You never know if you're actually going to have one or not. The biggest thing that comes with the database technology is we're now able to share and collaborate with other people virtually in real time as we're excavating. Not a lot of people are really collaborating virtually in real time with us, but they could if they wanted to. So it's a great tool that we have. Next slide, please. So really our databases are about managing our artifacts. There's a lot of things that we have to deal with as they're coming out of the field. We have another one of my colleagues at UCSD has developed a system just to deal with artifacts, all using barcodes or QR codes. And it's information as basic as, where is the crate that has this potsherd? And it will tell you that. And then it's managing the contextual information, which is what my project, OpenDig, that's what you saw before, filling out these forms in the field using iPhones, managing all that geographical information. So the measurements that we take in the field, using total stations or GPS systems, as well as these different 3D models and the laser scan data. And being able to share information, collaborate with other researchers, which could be things like the Pottery Informatics query database. So being able to upload a potsherd and find a similar result. And then, of course, preventing the data avalanche. People talk about now, the problem that we have is we are creating a data avalanche. We go into the field, we're taking thousands of photos, we're taking terabytes and terabytes of data are being acquired with all these different devices that we're using. But databases are the only way that we can actually deal with all of this information without being overwhelmed by it. So they're absolutely crucial to being able to manage all of the pretty pictures that you're seeing beforehand. Next slide, please. But then the question comes, are these just a bunch of shiny toys, or are they actually useful for the discipline today? Next slide, please. Archaeologists are primarily concerned with controlling space and time. Space can be dealing with things like, where did this particular artifact, and then time can be the question of, when did this artifact come from? Now, all of these different tools that I've mentioned contribute to understanding and controlling space and time. Next slide, please. And then sharing information is one of the other fundamental things that all of this new technology helps us do. It used to be 50 years ago that you would have to wait for a primary publication to come out about a site before you know you would know what was actually being done there. With this sort of technology, as I said before, you could almost know in real time as things are being done, which can help you understand and process this information in your own excavations by knowing what else is happening out there. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about two cases that shows how this sort of information has affected biblical archaeology in two examples that we have. Next slide, please. So, King Solomon's mines and the 10th century debate. So, to kind of catch you up with what this idea of the 10th century debate is, it basically falls between biblical minimalists and biblical maximalists. So, on one side, biblical minimalists are those who, to sum it up, say, look, the Bible was written around the 5th century, so all the stories that come beforehand are probably myth. The biblical maximalists likewise just say, no, what the stories are true representations of the past, and there has to be something to it. So we have this sort of thing. Next slide, please. So on one side, so here we are. We're now sitting on the site of Khirbet Feinan, which is the site of biblical Punon. And we're looking into Wadi Khalid, which is where all of the copper mines in the Feinan district in Jordan are at. Just on the other side of those hills is where the site of Khirbet Nahash, Arabic for ruins of copper, sits. Next slide, please. Now, Khirbet Nahash has made a splash in recent years because it has contributed to our understanding of the 10th century debate. Here you have, again, a picture from what you were seeing before in the video, which are those radiocarbon dates in the, this is one of the deep probes that they did through the slag mound, and these radiocarbon dates reveal that there was very intensive industrial copper smelting during the 10th century. Next slide, please. Another example is using that laser scan point cloud. This is of that fort that they mentioned in the video that you saw earlier. And you can see again the foundations of this fort demonstrate that it was built in the 10th century. Now, while my advisor who's excavated this, my advisor Tom Levy, is not saying that it was Solomon who came out here and excavated or ran these copper mines, what it does demonstrate is that there is a complex society capable of industrial copper smelting during the 10th century. Now, we can't dig Jerusalem in the same way that we can dig Feinan. No one lives out here. No one wants to live out here. It is hot. It is dusty. Imagine being in Anza Borrego in the middle of summer. This is what this is like. Very much the same way. But it allows us now to excavate, to explore these sites in ways that we can't with Jerusalem, and then we can understand what were complex societies actually like during the 10th century. And if it wasn't for the sort of technology that we are using at the site, it would be a lot more difficult to make the claims that we are now able to make because we have a tight control of space and a tight control of the time. Next slide, please. EX3 was a Museum of the Future, an exhibition that was demonstrated this last spring at UCSD. Next slide, please. And I'm going to read some of the quotes from the website that's there now, just because my advisor, Tom, says things in a very eloquent way here. So, first off, as an introduction, this conference brought together more than 40 of the world's leading archaeologists, biblical scholars, Egyptologists, historians, and geoscientists. Next slide, please. So this exhibition was, in part, this demonstration. It was using all of this immersive visual technology to show what this research was from all of these different disciplines. So here I am actually working on setting up the last minute of one of our visual demonstration walls. And one of the things is we had 2 days basically to set up the exhibition. Sure, we were planning all of this beforehand, but Cal IT is a very active building. There are always things going on, and you can't really reserve a space a week in advance to set everything up. So we had a couple days to build one of the virtual immersive environments, to set up all of these different visual tiled display walls and be able to put all of these things on there. So this is just one of the displays that we had. I'm going to show you a couple of clips of what the exhibition was like. Next slide, please. And next to start it. So this is the same wall that I'm working on here, and this was just a way to be able to show quickly all the different sort of acquisition techniques that we have, the data analysis and the dissemination, so people could see the different tools that we're using in the field. Next slide, please. And next again. Behind you, you're seeing a 3D model that was created using the balloon photography, and this is actually a Neolithic site, but on top of it are Iron Age burials. So there's some mortuary archaeology that's happening here, which relates directly to a massive Iron Age cemetery on the other side of the wadi. So again, we're using these 3D site models to be able to understand the spatial context of these Iron Age burials with Iron Age burials that are just across the way from us. Next slide, please. So the website, which is up now, anyone can visit this. They can actually see all the different videos from the conference as well as see the entire exhibition. They filmed each one of the different areas there to show what it's like. So this website does not advocate any solutions to the story of the ancient Israel's exodus from Egypt, known from the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. Rather, it highlights new transdisciplinary perspectives on this ancient puzzle. Next slide. An experiment in transdisciplinary research, team science, and scholarly communication using technologies developed for the Museum of the Future. So again, we're highlighting the way that we brought in not just archaeologists, but we had geoscientists who did a lot of modeling, looking at the different way that the eruptions in Thera would have affected things. Next slide, please. And this picture is the one I want to end on because I feel like it highlights what I've been trying to present to you this morning. This is actually Dick Atkinson. He is the former UC president, was also a director of the National Science Foundation, sitting next to my advisor, Tom Levy, and they're looking at these geoscientists' models of eruptions and how they could affect something as far away as Egypt using this thing called the wave, which is a wide area virtual environment, and they're able to stand next to it, look at it, and think about these things together. I certainly encourage you to look at the website and experience the entire exhibition itself. Next slide, please. So, really quickly, there are some resources if you want to explore some of the topics that I've mentioned here further. Exodus.calit2.net will be the place where you can see that exhibition that I've made reference to and gives you a chance to maybe understand some of these topics further. This is our website for the Levantine Lab, so anthro.ucsd.edu/tlevy, and all of our publications, pictures, things like that, they're all up on there. A couple books, Cyber Archaeology in the Holy Land, The Future of the Past, by Tom Levy. This is a free ebook that is on the Biblical Archaeology website. Historical Biblical Archaeology in the Future, The New Pragmatism. You can get that on Amazon. I think it's like $25-30. A couple documentaries, PBS, that should be Nova, not Noah. Quest for Solomon's Mines, which features the work at Khirbet and Nahas. And National Geographic Time Scanners. I've seen the episode about Petra. This talks about the use of laser scanners in archaeology. This should be coming out sometime in fall this year. But if you have access to UKA websites, you might be able to get it earlier. And then a quick big thanks to my center, the National Science Foundation, who have supported my research so far, and a thanks to different people who have supported me, especially my wife. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. I have lots of questions. I jotted them down with my daughter's crayon, so
Nice.
I got desperate there. And hopefully you all have a few questions, too. I'll start with a question, though. I was thinking it's almost like the goal here is to not be what you described as the last witness. The goal here is to document everything so that pretty much everybody can witness to stuff. How often do you think to yourself, man, I wish archaeologists would have waited until we could have been here with all of our data and fill everything in so that it didn't get all destroyed? How often is that cross your mind?
Fortunately, I would say that for quite a while now, it's been the practice of archaeologists to not fully excavate sites. So it's not necessarily true across the board, but you will see that most archaeologists today, they will always leave something unexcavated. So for example, at Khirbet Nahas, the fort that I was talking about, they excavated 3 of the 4 chambers. So there will always be something else there that people in the future can excavate as technology advances. But I mean, sure, with things like this 3D modeling from photography, I'm sitting here thinking, like, what sort of things can I use that people have already done in the past to create these 3D models? Or something as simple as, man, I really wish I would have had a digital camera capable of doing this 10 years ago.
All right, any questions from the audience? We have a roving mic, so just wave your hand. One in the back, Pastor Geary.
I wasn't here earlier, but did you talk about the camel controversy recently?
I did not talk
Would
about
you just comment on and explain to people what's going on right now in the field?
So the camel controversy, this is actually a former colleague of mine and my advisor's former student, Ben Yosef, has published results recently tied to high-precision radiocarbon dating that say that the camel was not domesticated in Israel before the 10th century. That's all he's saying. The camel was not domesticated in Israel before the 10th century. I think people are making a lot more of a big deal out of this than they need to. News sources have basically said, oh, camels don't belong in Genesis or whatever. That's really all it is. Camel wasn't domesticated. At least, that's what we also need on other hands is that people are publishing the same sort of results, high-precision radiocarbon dating that relate to the same sort of zooarchaeology finds that they're finding in their area. But at least right now, in the southern Negev and likewise, that's very close to where we excavate in Jordan, we're seeing camel domestication around that time, which probably relates to the copper trade.
So now that you enter your data on your iPad or whatever, before you had your validation queen, right? So if you're putting in, I was curious too, how is the database, is it set up with validation?
That's being built into it right now. So I mean, this is an ongoing process, but the idea of this database is to mimic Larry and Denise Herr. So that we have the data validation happening as people are entering the data, and then we have the sort of data consistency that we got from Larry entering it in the database by controlling what people are entering into the database.
That's what I was curious, and if there was so they're working on that part.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process.
You mentioned at one point in your talk about the difference between biblical minimalists and maximalists. And it came to mind the term biblical archaeology could by some be construed as an oxymoron.
Yes.
Being that archaeology is a science, evidence-based, and biblical studies are faith-based.
Yeah.
Any comment?
I would say that biblical archaeology, for the most part, is not really used in the discipline today. It's appropriate for venues like this. But really, when we think about biblical archaeology, we tend to refer to it as either Levantine archaeology, Syro-Palestinian archaeology. The problem is that every one of these terms are loaded. So Syro-Palestinian archaeology kind of ignores Israel and Jordan. Levantine archaeology is borrowing from a colonialist term that referred to the region. So we have yet to find a perfect term that encompasses the whole thing. The nice thing is that biblical archaeology refers to anything that was in the biblical periods, but of course then that ignores the Islamic period archaeology or the prehistoric archaeology in the area. So it's a very problematic thing to find the terms that we can use.
I want to thank you for the clear and direct way you presented this. And you didn't put in too many terms that distracted. The whole picture was good. Mark anticipated my question. My question was, and you might make further comment, just how in this interdisciplinary field that you're working is biblical archaeology a part of it? I mean, how does the field look upon the term biblical archaeology?
I feel like UCSD is a really good example of this because we do have a lot of people in many different disciplines working on what are effectively the biblical periods. And we have people who are interested in Iron Age archaeology. I mean, Iron Age archaeology has almost always been, someone who has a faith-based background is interested in that period because of an upbringing involving the Bible, and they say, I want to go dig this, I want to understand this more. We have people in my lab now who don't necessarily have that background who are interested in these same periods because now they're interested in more anthropological ideas, social evolution, social change, and the Iron Age happens to be one of the great areas for that. Likewise, it just happens to be because we're digging in that area, we have people in other disciplines, whether it's geosciences or computer science, who are interested in working on the data that we're acquiring for their own studies. So, people don't have a problem with biblical archaeology. I mean, they're very aware that what we do relates strongly to the biblical world and the biblical themes. But they're interested in doing it because they're interested in their science and their discipline. So we don't really have a problem with it.
Since you've been using these new technologies, can you give us an example of an idea that you thought was true, and then with this new show, oh, wait a minute, that's not true, I mean, it's dinger, that kind of a deal?
I can't say that there's been anything that is, overturning previous ideas at this point in time, but I would refer back to what I was mentioning earlier. Part of this whole 10th century debate, at least in our area in the southern Levant, we can say without a doubt, we have organized complex societies capable of doing industrial copper smelting at this point in time. This is really the first complete data set with this sort of tight control using this technology that is saying this sort of thing. And, but even though we've said this, people continue to debate it. So, I don't know that there's going to be anything from the technology that's going to overturn anything, but it's small steps. So, there's an increased objectivity with all of these new advances that we create.
Well, hasn't there been an overturn of the maximalist view by putting in the same generation people, like indicated in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, that there were one family that was an artificer in both brass and iron in the same generation. At the time, which just a few chapters earlier, a chapter or two earlier, had the origin of this river that came out of Eden and flowed uphill in 4 branches, one of them going around Assyria. I'm going by the King James Version, which supposedly is the best. And another branch going around Ethiopia, and a third one, the Euphrates, which is supposedly at the heart of Garden of Eden.
Right. And really now we're getting into a kind of textual criticism. And, I feel like there are biblical maximalists who have handled some of these sort of criticisms and problems. Likewise, there's the biblical minimalists who, address it very strongly. It's not really something I can address too much as I'm not a technical critic. I am a dirt archaeologist, and, tend to be outside of my area. But, it's something that I think over time we'll see what goes on with it. We'll see how that debate develops. But so far there's no clear overturning one way or another, I would say. Yeah.
What kind of response do you typically get from a congregation of Adventism? We, in the 60s, 70s, we had archaeologists going out to find specific things and come home and prove specific textual things. And now you're standing up here telling us you're a dirt archaeologist. I mean, what is the church's response to that? Because hasn't archaeology in part been to blame for all this historical, critical kind of, we went out to find certain things and found more than we expected.
Yeah.
And it kind of ruined us in some ways, according to some people.
There's still, and if I dare use the term, a layman archaeology within our church, who have a desire to see archaeology be an apologetic discipline. They want archaeology to prove that the flood happened, prove that the Exodus was out there. As an archaeologist myself, that tends to be, as soon as someone in the church hears I'm an archaeologist, that's what they want to talk. I just tend to shift the conversation. I'm more interested in talking about the context. So what archaeology gives us for understanding, or the contribution to the church, is not apologetics, but an increased understanding of the biblical world, which I feel in turn gives us an increased understanding into what that meant for them in their day and what that can mean for us in our day today.
And actually doing a greater service to biblical criticism, maybe in the process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm missing a hand. I'm sorry. Sonny?
My question is, you did your research or your excavation in Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
How come you didn't go to the current Baghdad or with the site of the civilization, where you can, find the old fossils, the people that actually lived in that area? But you choose to go to Jordan. What is the rationale of going to Jordan?
I would say that it's purely chance. It happened to be that Walla Walla, when I was going there at the time, was affiliated with these excavations at Tel El Umeri. They were always promoting them. That's where I ended up. And it tends to be that when you do archaeology, you focus on a geographical region. So these technologies could be applied anywhere, but it just happens to be that I dig in Jordan. That's a community that I'm involved with, and that's what I do. So I would say it's really pure chance that I ended up there.
How do you identify a site for a dig? And once you excavate it, how do you know what it was or where it comes in the line of biblical eras?
I would say that most of the sites that have been identified today through pedestrian survey, so people walking around. And usually these sort of pedestrian surveys were controlled, so they would try to set up, I'm going to go from this point to this point and figure out every site in between. There are some sites that are now being identified through remote sensing, so things like Google Earth, satellite imagery, aerial photography, and there's a lot of what's called crowdsourcing. So there's a project that also came out of CHISA 3 where they took all of this satellite imagery, high quality, high resolution satellite imagery of Mongolia, put it out there, put it out to the people and said, identify anything that you think is a point of interest. And, crowdsourcing basically takes, as you get more and more people looking at the exact same spot, it might be something interesting. So it kind of helps filter out just, a bunch of people saying click, 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 those are sites. It adds more quality control to it, as it were. As far as identifying sites when we're actually there, like I mentioned before, pottery is still one of our major diagnostic tools that we use. Getting to something like social identity is a little bit more difficult, and that's something that my wife could probably talk more about than me. But doing things like dating a site, pottery is one of our main parts of that, but also these high-precision radiocarbon dates give us something to work with when we say, when did the site come from? And then there's probably a whole other hour that I could talk about on archaeological methodology of how we deal with layers and strata and everything that help us identify different occupational periods at a site.
And the pottery is simply because that's what has lasted, correct? Okay.
Pottery basically turns into a rock.
Right. But you run into a few other things once in a while.
If we have textual remains, that's also very helpful. When you look at talking about something like Babylon, they actually have dates that they talk about, a king's year and things like that. And through textual criticism, they've really been able to pin down what a lot of those dates actually relate to. But we don't have those texts. There's very few that we run into, and certainly very few that even have dates mentioned on them. So.
Any further questions? I have one more question. What percentage do you think of digs are deploying the technology we discussed today?
23.52. It's constantly increasing. I would say that the more that I've gone to our various research meetings, and like the American School of Oriental Research, they host a meeting every year. And more and more, I'm hearing people deploying these sort of technologies. So I would say the vast majority of digs today are doing some sort of 3D modeling, and certainly it will become more prevalent because the technology is becoming more accessible.
If I came to your cave, how many sites could I go to?
Currently, what we have documented in our cave is really quite a few. We got Luxor in Egypt. We got several sites in Jordan, and then we have things that aren't archaeological sites as well. But I mean, you would be able to even go to Mars and visit that in our cave. So it's pretty cool.
With the deployment of the advanced technologies, is it changing the demographics of archaeologists? If we put the gist to that question, demographics, the age group, is it getting younger? Is it affecting those that have been in archaeology for a period of time?
Yes and no. I mean, I would say that it's affecting the demographics, and we're now beginning to get more non-archaeologists participating in archaeology. So that's probably the biggest demographic change. But on the other hand, certainly where we work in Jordan, we're beginning to see a big turnover. So a lot of the people who have been working in Jordan are now on the verge of retirement. So you're looking at a big generational change that's coming into the discipline anyway. That's also true in our universities. So I don't know that it's the tech that's doing that, but maybe it's because of that change that the tech is finding its way into the archaeology. I don't know. These are just my own opinions, so no documented idea there.
All right. I think we got one more question over here.
This may be is this on? This may be a stupid question, but when does archaeology start in geology?
I don't know that I can answer that. Sorry. I don't think it's a stupid question, but I mean, as far as geology is concerned, if I understood your question correctly, geology is used in archaeology. They're different disciplines, though.
No, I just wondered in the time frame of geology, which is very, very old, when in your discipline does it start with you? I mean, like 100,000 or 300,000?
Well, then that becomes a different question altogether, and it would be at what point do humans start leaving things behind for us to dig up?
Okay. Sorry about the question.
No. It's a perfectly valid question.
All right. Well, I think that's it for questions. So let's thank Matt again for the great presentation.
This morning, okay. Again, we go to worship. Those who are welcome to stay by for that. And I say that because after worship, there's a potluck meal here. But there's also a meeting with Matt and Monique and anyone else who will join us in the boardroom. The boardroom's over in the sanctuary building, kind of out toward the edge of the drop down into the Lutheran church property. We have a nice boardroom table. We'll have all the potluck over there. We can sit for an hour or so and just ask more questions, get better acquainted with them as well as his work and possibly hers as well. And we invite people. We always have a good crowd that comes and enjoys that kind of fellowship and deeper dialogue. No other announcements. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we will, proceed, those of us who want to, on over to worship. Thank you for being here.